Welcome back to another one of your Flip Lectures. Today we're going to talk about economics and politics of the 1920s. Now the 1920s is going to be characterized by economic changes that are going to build on the changes that we've already discussed during the era of industrialization around the turn of the century. Now industrialization in America continues to develop throughout this time. New technologies, such as better electricity, more efficient machinery, and especially the creation of the modern assembly line are going to mean that Americans are able to produce even more products at a lower cost than ever before. Because of this, the economy becomes based around the mass consumption of these mass-produced goods. There's going to be many new products available, and likewise, the availability of credits in order to be able to borrow money to buy these products is going to lead to an economic boom. And all this new technology and new products creates newer and bigger businesses, which is then going to lead to a boom in the stock market as people look to get in on the prosperity of these businesses by purchasing stock in them. And so the modern assembly line is a concept that we probably already know well. It's using interchangeable parts in order to put together a product one step at a time. And as the product moves down the line from station to station, each person has a specific task. In terms of like the automobile, there would be one person who would put on the tires, one person who would add kind of different products. And so essentially we talk about the assembly line. It's an even more efficient way to mass produce products. And the end result of all of this technology is essentially the lowering of prices to make things that used to be considered luxuries now affordable consumer goods. In modern day, the assembly line is still widely used. This is a photo of an iPhone factory in China, and as you see, a lot of the same techniques are still used in industry today. So all this increased technology, as well as the lowering of prices because of industrialization, is going to lead to significant changes in material life, the way that people are going to carry out their daily tasks. And consumer goods are going to come to dominate the American economy. Personal items, such as razors, Kleenex, as well as chemicals to clean, become commonplace, as do vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, washing machines, and other home appliances. In terms of fashion, clothing is going to be mass-produced like never before, changing Americans' fashions. Also, the invention of deodorant, mouthwash, perfume, and the lowering of the prices make them everyday items. The way that Americans eat is also going to change. As new foods and drinks are created, such as carbonated sodas, frozen foods, cheap candy, and cookies, they'll be mass-produced and then sold to Americans. And so, what the 1920s is going to represent is a fundamental shift in the way Americans live their lives. And the quintessential example of this change lies in Henry Ford. Henry Ford's Ford Motor Company perfects the idea of the mass production of automobiles. He institutes the assembly line and the division of labor in an effort to create the country's first affordable car, the Model T, which could be purchased for only $300. He also changes the way that work went. And the Ford model was the simple idea that every employee should be able to buy a Ford car. That if you give employees good wages and good working conditions, means they will stay, get even more efficient at their jobs, and also you will get back some of the money you pay them because they will all buy your cars. And so the Ford Motor Company becomes kind of the example of the economic changes that are taking place in the 1920s. Higher wages, more consumer products, and the use of increased technology in order to make production more efficient. And the American car is going to really change everything about American life. As we looked at already, it changes the idea of dating, changes the idea of transportation, of freedom, and of a bunch of different ideas. And by the end of the 1920s, cars are actually going to become very, very common, replacing horse-drawn carriages in almost every major American city and in a lot of places in American life. And what the automobile for Americans represents more than anything else is the idea of freedom. Freedom of movement, freedom of choice, the ability to kind of go to places that maybe were inaccessible before. And so with the invention of the automobile also will come the creation of America's road system. Another major invention that changes things in America is electric power and the modern electrical grid. So electricity used to be centered around water sources. But the invention of new wires and new techniques to instantaneously transmit electricity over long distances is going to mean that no longer do businesses and cities need to be concentrated around water sources. And this is going to lead to the increased development of urban areas in the United States. All this change also is going to lead to changes in economic life, the way that Americans buy and sell things. And as mass production increases, economic growth is going to mean people have more money to spend. And mass production is going to mean that those items are actually going to be cheaper. Also, the wide availability of credit meant that you could borrow money now in order to finance more purchasing that you could then hopefully pay back later. But what this leads to is the development of mass consumption. The idea of Americans going shopping at places like department stores and small malls. And it really starts to make the American economy revolve around the idea of purchasing a large amounts of goods. And in order to facilitate mass consumption, businesses turn to advertisement in order to sell their products in ways they never have before. And also the national retail chains, such as department stores, grocery stores, and other things, begin to spread across the country to provide a space for Americans to go and purchase all of these new consumer goods. Now, some examples of early advertisements involve endorsement deals, such as Babe Ruth's endorsement with Red Rock Cola. But take a look at some of these advertisements and see if you can figure out the techniques that are being used to sell you these products. And so with the invention of all these new products, as well as the advertisements to sell them, new stores get created, such as Woolworths, as well as Macy's, in order to provide a single place in which you could purchase everything from food and towels to deodorant, Listerine, to kitchen appliances. We're going to call these stores department stores, and they're going to fundamentally change the way that Americans buy and sell products. And so all this economic change is also going to have a deep effect on the politics and the government of the 1920s. In 1920, Warren G. Harding is going to be elected, promising a return to normalcy after the World War. And in his inauguration, he says, America's present need is not heroics but healing, normalcy, not revolution, serenity, not surgery, not drama but dispassionateness. And essentially, the idea of the 1920s is Americans try to move on from the political crusades and the war. They're going to turn to presidents who promise them prosperity as well as a return to normal life. And so normalcy is this pre-war mentality where Americans kind of upset with the outcome of the war, as well as exhaustion from the progressive movement, essentially are going to want to return back to what they think of as normal American life. And so in the 1920s, politics is going to be characterized by a few things. One is going to be women's suffrage, granted by the 19th Amendment in 1920, meaning that politicians are now going to have to a certain extent, put women's issues into politics. But the presidents of the 20s that were elected were 3 Republican presidents in a row that all had a pro-business, laissez-faire message. And that laissez-faire message is going to return, and it's going to replace progressivism. Though a lot of the reforms, such as the end of child labor and the Immediate Inspection Act, are going to stay, the attitude is going to fundamentally shift. Laissez-faire over progressivism. And so Warren G. Harding's first term, his only term, is going to be characterized by those laissez-faire ideas. He's going to lower taxes as well as raise tariffs to protect industry in the United States. We call that idea of raising tariffs to protect industry protectionism. However, Warren G. Harding's term was also characterized by scandal, in which private oil companies actually paid government officials to get the rights to drill on federal land without any sort of bidding or competition. It involved millions of dollars and is still today considered one of the worst scandals in United States history. And the Teapot Dome scandal led Americans to believe that the corruption of the Gilded Age was very much still with them, and that big money and big business could still buy influence in the government. So President Warren G. Harding actually dies in office in 1923. He's not assassinated, he dies of natural causes. But he's going to be succeeded by his Vice President, Calvin Coolidge, who's going to carry Harding's policies forward. And Cal Coolidge was very famous for saying that the business of America is business. And throughout his terms in office, he finished up Warren G. Harding's and then served a full term of his own. He was characterized by laissez-faire policies, in which Calvin Coolidge basically tried to kind of allow businesses to do what they needed to do. And so Cal Coolidge runs for president. His nickname is also Silent Cal. He is a man of very few words. And once Cal Coolidge is done with his term, the next president is going to be another Republican called Herbert Hoover. And Herbert Hoover promised to build on the prosperity of the past two presidents, and he actually promised Americans to put a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. And he likewise believed that the way to get American prosperity to continue was laissez-faire, the government being less involved in business. However, the Great Depression will start under Herbert Hoover, and his laissez-faire policies will actually be blamed for a lot of the problems in that early era. And so Herbert Hoover brought back the idea of rugged individualism, that people should rely on themselves, not the government, for help. So as we've seen here, the progressive era shifted America towards one idea. In the 1920s, and normalcy is going to shift America back towards laissez-faire government policies. And so ultimately the return of laissez-faire, as well as high tariffs, are going to help the expansion of the United States' wealth. The stock market is largely unregulated, leading to an unprecedented boom. However, a lot of that boom was based on borrowed money, and very few regulations meant the stock market was particularly vulnerable to crashes. Big business is going to get even bigger during the 1920s. Manufacturing in America is going to take off. The United States is going to become the #1 manufacturing power in the world. However, the lack of regulations as well as the lack of social programs in certain areas is going to lead to major problems in the future during what we're going to come to call the Great Depression. And so now to wrap up the 1920s, they certainly roared, but there was a cost to all that roaring. The cultural changes are going to lead to culture wars between science and religion, between traditionalists and modernists, and that is going to cause some deep divisions in American society. There is also little to no progress on race relations in America, as segregation and racial violence are going to continue all throughout the 1920s. Also, the Prohibition era led to the rise of organized crime and kind of the cultural memory, this era being associated with gangsters such as Al Capone. The economic troubles of the Roaring '20s kind of go back to that laissez-faire idea, that the huge manufacturing boom creates a bubble. Companies simply overproduce products. They produce more products than people are willing to buy. And so when people stop buying things, that's going to lead to a recession that's going to end up leading to a Great Depression. Also, Americans borrowed too much money during the 1920s. And as the 20s roll to an end and those debts aren't being paid back, this again is going to lead into the greatest depression in American history. The excesses of this time, too, the consumer lifestyle, is going to mean Americans have very little savings for when times are going to turn bad. And also, practices in the stock market are going to create instability, such as using loans to purchase stocks, as well as risky investments in poor businesses with the belief that the good times are never going to come to an end. But as we know, the good times never last forever. And so the high-flying prosperity of the 1920s is going to lead us into the Great Depression.